Hello, and welcome to this presentation, which will briefly characterize one of the questions posed in the public consultation. I will very briefly talk about absolute and intensity targets and ongoing discussion and concerns on allowing companies to set intensity targets. First, I would like to clarify that this is not a new question, but rather a recurrent one, as you can see from the title of this article of August 2015. Climate change requires an absolute emission reduction, and this is part of a climate integrity check of any science-based targets. However, most oil companies are setting intensity targets at the point of sales, which do not necessarily guarantee absolute emission reductions, particularly in the short term. The science-based targets accepts intensity targets, provided that the consideration of growth expectations still leads to an absolute emission reduction. Absolute emissions targets seem to cause a psychological barrier in business actors in terms of the freedom to do business, even if businesses already operate under all sorts of constraints. And this barrier seems to be unblocked by intensity targets. On the other hand, for many stakeholders, intensity targets are seen as potentially greenwashing because they do not guarantee absolute emission reductions, even when the reductions in intensity are very significant. And it is extremely unlikely that a company in established business would be able to grow its activities in such a way that it would not lead to an absolute emission reduction. On this topic, within the technical working group, arguments have been made that given the significance of the reductions in intensity that are being put forward, there is no way the reductions, this magnitude, can be achieved while continuing with an old business model that continues to output carbon into the atmosphere. And second, that intensity targets are preferable because they give much needed flexibility for the change ahead. The current guidance proposes to accept intensity targets set in a 5 to 15-year window, which reflect changes in the final demand. Final energy is increasingly decarbonized, with a recommendation to set a long-term target as well. In addition to this requirement, integrated oil companies and integrated energy companies, as well as upstream oil companies, should also set an absolute short-term target on the extraction of fossil fuels, reflecting the necessary changes that need to occur also at the supply side. This is a decrease of fossil fuel supply. So the questions we pose to the public are, is it acceptable for companies to set only intensity targets, or do you think they should also set absolute targets? And do you think that requiring companies to set an intensity target reflecting changes in demand and an absolute target reflecting changes in supply is sufficient to address the concerns about the climate integrity of the targets set by oil and gas companies or oil, gas, and integrated energy companies? We also have similar recordings for the other consultation questions, so make sure to check them out. Thank you for your attention and for your interest in this public consultation.